What's up everybody, my name is Nick and I'm a super nice guy. Today I'm here to make the next video in the series of the design workflow process in which we convert wireframes into the lovely and beautiful visual design screens. If you didn't catch the last video of converting sketches into wireframes, you can check that out here, but let's just jump right into making these designs. Alrighty then, here we are inside of Figma once again, the most amazing program in the world. So last time we moved into this wireframe from this sketch here, and now we need to make a visual design from it. Before we begin, I'd like to just call out a couple things, and that is you will notice the organizational structure has expanded immensely on the left-hand side, these pages. Again, going off of the typical approach that I see in a lot of these product design shops and companies, we have a design section. So I've really just converted the FigJam file. I've brought it into here and created a sketches just for reference. If we ever want to look back, it's really easy to do. Then the date we made the wireframes is the following page. So I've locked this in time. The beauty of these is that they are paper trails for where we've been in the process. We have a page for them. We will never delete these or change them. We can always refer back to them. And then finally, we have the visual design page in which we will be working and moving this wireframe into a fully fleshed out designed screen. Now you'll notice a couple other things such as local components. I've just created a sort of pseudo design system so I can make this as realistic as possible for me, assuming there's already a design system that has been created. Inside of here, I just have very simple type styles and color choices. I don't expect to get too complex with all of this. I've really just based this off of some really minimal needs for this screen, and the colors were really chosen at random other than the grays. And local components can also be useful for project-specific components that are made that aren't necessarily attached to the greater design system, although they can always be moved in later, but it's nice to have the convenience if you're testing things out and still want to work in a component-based way, which we all should. Then finally, what I have is the inspiration section. So you could just jump right into designing a screen. Maybe we already know the brand and the design system really well, but maybe not. Maybe we are exploring an entirely new area and we need to just see what's out there and do some competitives and vet some inspiration and see what other big players are doing. So if we look in this page now, what I have here is just a couple screens that I pulled from Mobin, or if it's called Mobbin, I have no idea, but the great source of mobile screens that you can go and pull them in. So I have a few here that we'll just look at quickly. We're not gonna copy any of these styles. We're just gonna see quickly and visually how these other companies are achieving this, in this case, wallet and balance screens. So in this first one here, we have some crypto material. And again, really what I'm looking at here is we have our balance nice and large. It's sort of the main hero of the screen. The number is very important. This is a recurring theme in all of these that I've noticed. Large number, large number, large number, and so on and so forth. So what is the number that we are putting in front of the user to see, this is my balance, this is my current card balance, etc. The next thing I'm looking at is this list here. Now, in a general sense, it's just a list. So this list is the watch list, and it's a type of crypto and some numbers, and there's multiple styles here. So I'm looking at bold weight for Bitcoin. Its abbreviation has been de-emphasized to a gray, and then we have two number values on the right-hand side. Over here, we have a couple more examples of the list. Again, if you remember what we wireframed, we have a section where we list transactions. And so that's what I'm looking at when I'm seeing these lists here. Here we have essentially the same thing, transactions. Again, we have a large, more bold title. We have a de-emphasized category and a de-emphasized date. And then on the right, we just have dollar amount, and it's treated in a more bold way. The same thing on this final screen here. Again, it's a different list, but we have cash balance, 2 accounts is de-emphasized, and then we have some numerical information on the right treated in 2 different styles. I tend to think these all look really great, and that's why I've pulled them in. So I'm going to be emulating this typical look and feel. Two examples here have the credit card look approach, which is what we have been talking about since we've sketched this idea out. So the one on the left is Uber Cash. It doesn't look a ton like a card. It doesn't look so great in my opinion. But over here we have actual, I believe this one's PayPal. We have actual representations of what these cards look like, and that's more or less what I'm going for. So I'm gonna look at that one for reference there. And then I suppose the last thing I'm looking at here is we had a couple cards. If I remember correctly, we sketched out and wireframed some ideas where we had our balance, our available balance, and then we had payment due in, and then we also had a weekly activity graph or chart. So here there are two really subtle cards with rounded corners. I really like this. This list is also on a card with rounded corners. I'll probably start off with making a gray screen and have content surfaced on top of it and go with this approach. Some other things that do relate to what I have are the plus buttons, the really simple add buttons. That is the approach we will be taking. Another one would be the representation of a chart in a really simple line, but I think these ones are really small. This is a different sort of approach here. This is a different industry and it's conveying different information. In this case, charts for crypto. Our chart is going to be a little more prominent because we have a little bit more room and we want to really elevate the data of the user's spending activity. But they all relate more or less to what we're going for, so it's always good to check these out before we jump into designing. So let's do that now. All right, here we are inside our visual design page. Again, working organized is super important and will help you out tremendously. I am going to start with something a little bit more granular, just to make sure I'm aligning these things to an actual device and not making any weird mistakes. I will bring in the iOS status bar here, and then I'm also going to bring in the home indicator bar. Again, if you're wondering how I'm moving this stuff around, I did make an awesome video on keyboard shortcuts. Here I'm doing Option W for up, Option S for down. If you want to check out that video, I highly recommend some of the stuff that I talk about because it's always the hotkeys I'm using, so I'll link that up here in the corner. Look for that now. But anyway, now we have the status bar and the home indicator on the screen. So we can safely place content here and we know it's not going to run into or be an issue for that status bar. Let's first go ahead and maybe make some... Well, I guess we already have these rulers because I copied this over from the wireframe screen, but if we place a shape here and just make it 24-24 from left and right, and then we place some rulers there, it will just give us some good guides to work on. Okay, let's start with the title wallet here. So I'm going to draw a text box and we're going to call it wallet, and I'm going to left align this. And with our type styles that I defined really loosely, here we have display large 40 pixel by 48 line height. We're just going to use that there. And if you click that corner, if you double click any of those points, it will hug the contents of just that element. So let's do that. And then I'm going to want a plus icon. Here in the wireframe, I use just typography, but for actual design, we're going to want an SVG that our developers take. We don't want to rely on plain text, HTML, to be in action because that can change in a variety of different ways, where the SVG will be always this icon no matter how it's being rendered in the browser or on the mobile device rather in this example. So let's pull in a plus icon, and for the icons, assuming in this real situation we already have icons set up and everything, but let's open the material design icons. I'll link this and an iOS library in the description below. The iOS library can pull in, if you look up iOS design kit in Figma, you can find those status bars and utility home indicators and things like that. In material designs, you can just search that and find their actual library. And so what we're going to do here is go into assets and type out add. Here it is a plus icon. We're just going to grab this one and pull it in. So when we pulled this in, you will notice it's no longer a component. We always want to work in a componentized way, and so we will cut that again, and let's move it into assets. And we're not going to worry about getting fancy with a page for these, but we will put it in a folder group that we create via text. So we'll say icon/add and then Command Option K, and now we have that icon here. So we can pull it in a number of ways, but I'll just copy it once more and then now paste it, and it's purple, so it's linking back to our local component library. Okay, let's just drag this up over here. And because this is flush with the header here, the page title, I'm gonna make that auto layout, select them both, Shift A, and make this fill all the way. And then see how it has 184 as a distance? That's kind of whack. We want to just say push these to the opposite edge of each other, and that's all we want. So we will change spacing mode to space between here, and now this is exactly what we want. It just makes things cleaner, so we know we're always pushing to the edge of the workable area. So with this, we've turned it into an auto layout. It's frame 14. We're just going to call this header. It's nice to name layers. People don't always do it, but it can be really helpful. And if you like getting super granular with details, I highly recommend it. So here we have header, and next we're going to create this credit card. This credit card is going to be styled like a real credit card, and maybe not an exact one like you might see in your actual wallet. We're going to make it a little cooler, a little bit more delightful, and have a more digital aesthetic. So for the card, let's create a text layer, and card name, we're going to say my fave card. We'll say the user has the ability to customize this card name, and so that's what we have here. And we're going to go down to, I think, headline large 24 by 32. So my next step down, and then we're going to duplicate this down a little bit further, and we will say maybe label medium. Okay, so label medium here, and looking back at our inspiration, I noticed they simplified the privacy of the card name, and I kind of liked that a lot. So if we just do a couple dots and then say 1, 2, 3, 4, I think that will suffice. And then we're going to want to create this chip thing here. So let's just create some values, maybe round this up, and then I wonder how I should achieve this in here. Maybe I'm going to draw 5 rows. This is just going to be how I perceive chips. It won't be one of the most fancy chips, but it will be a chip nonetheless. So if I create 5 rows, so with 4 lines here, press Shift A. Let's see. So with these lines, I think this should work fine. So we just want 4 lines centered in here, and then we're actually going to make 3 lines vertically. Okay, so we got these lines here. Let's group this whole thing in a frame. I do have 2 different auto layouts. I'm just calling these lines. Okay, so what I'm going to do to emulate some metal look is use 2 different grays here. I have my gray 7 and my gray 1. I actually made the lines the darkest, so gray 0 here. And what I'm going to do is I want the middle to be as light as possible, and then the edges are going to be a little bit darker. So I think we might have to use a darker gray. So maybe this gray will be more like 3, and then we're going to make a linear gradient. So if I'm just very quickly doing this, maybe pulling this way out here, you can see it looks a bit like metal. I might even just play with this a little bit more and free add in some other swatches here. So we have a little bit of some coloration going on. These lines are too dark though. They're not really looking like how we want them to look, and also they feel pretty thick. They can be less than 1 in this instance, so 0.5. It's not super bad to have 0.5 if this is essentially going to be converted into an SVG or a graphic. We're not actually telling developers to use half pixel amounts, but we still want these to blend in more closely with actually the color values we were using for the gradient. So if I click into this and pull from that gray and see how that looks, it's pretty good. I think it still needs to be a little bit richer, so we're gonna actually just use our own custom gray here. Maybe go with that and then zoom out, and I think we're gonna call it a day there. So for this, again, we're gonna use auto layout, and what I'm gonna do is say this text layer will be 232, and then this one here will also be 232, and then this one here is also going to be 232, and then this one, which we will call chip, is also going to be 232. Now I'll drag it out. If I hold command, it's just going to stretch the frame from right to left, so that's what we want. 232. although now we just kind of bumped it off here. So I'm gonna group these things and then Option D and push it all the way to the right hand side, and there we go. And now select all 3 rows essentially. These are each rows. Press Shift A, select all 3 rows essentially because these are 3 rows, and then press Shift A. Now we have our credit card, and we're gonna say maybe 24 padding in this thing, and we'll see how that looks. We also need to give it fill, which we'll get kind of crazy in a second, but for now let's just make it this color so we can see what we're doing. I think for a real credit card, 8 border radius kind of matches pretty well. Let's rename this to credit card, and then let's drop this puppy into our screen here. Okay, and as I'm working on this stuff, I am vetting out my 8 pixel spacing system, so we're 24 from the top. That's great. This card here, I will nudge it around until we're somewhere like 32, or maybe we just stick with 24. And then here we'll stretch this out, except we're not scaling anything. So if I press enter to go in, I need to change these to fill container. And there we go. Although this guy here should really be stretching with it. So we're gonna make that an auto layout and put it to the right hand side and remove that padding. And there we go. For this card, which feels a little tall right now, I'm going to press Command up arrow, and I'm noticing it's again not scaling. We're going to press enter and vertically fill container items, and I'm noticing some weirdness here. This one actually needs to be hug, and then there we go. So for this card, we're going to do some custom things where we can break free from our styles. So I'm actually going to create something a little potentially weird here. We're going to make it a gradient, and this other color, we kind of want it to be something warm, or maybe a little more in the pink and purples. Something like this seems pretty fun, I would say. Maybe we'll go with that. This chip definitely feels kind of huge and distracting, so we don't want that. I'm gonna quickly select it, press K to scale down, and I'm gonna find somewhere maybe 48 by 32. It went to 43, so I'm going to change that to 32 and then lock that in. I think that is feeling a little bit better. And now what I want to do is give this an edge so it looks more like a real card. I'm going to achieve this with a drop shadow. So a drop shadow, already it's giving it depth to make it look like a card. And actually we kind of like that one. So maybe we click into that and quickly reduce, push up the blur, reduce. Maybe it's good. Leave it at 8 and then bring down just a little bit of that opacity. And so now if you actually saw what happened when I put the blur down to 0, that's what we're going to do here. So make another one, blur down to 0, except Y, let's do 2 or 1. I think 1 looks more realistic. So it's giving us a fake edge here. And because it's going to be an edge, it needs to be 100%. So if we look at it like that, there's a little bit of depth to it. Let's go into that again. And I like when credit cards have a different color border than the surface area color. So let's make it something really fun and eccentric. Maybe it's a deeper purple. Maybe it's a totally different color, yellow, orange. Blue's kind of fun, kind of like a deep indigo there. So let's go with that and see what that looks like. All right, such is the creative process. I've just spent some time nudging this thing around a little bit. I'll open this up here. I spruced up the gradient. I went a little bit more vibrant with it. I also enhanced the color inside of this actual chip with a few different grays. I added more blue in basically. I did also add what could be achieved with a stroke as well, but a border outline to this chip. It's just a 0.5 spread and 25% opacity on black, and I think it gives it a nice little separation here on the chip from the card background. So I'm happy with this and I will move on. So next what I'm going to do, if we recall, I liked how the cards were in the inspiration example where there was a gray background and the cards were white, so we didn't really need to rely on shadows to create elevation and depth. So we're going to do that where I do like the pure white. It really adds a nice contrast to the colors. It brings them out and they appear more vibrant. I'm a big fan of clean design, but we're going to use some gray here and it's going to be really subtle. So for the background on this device, we're going to have pure white at the top, and then for the bottom swatch, make it fully opaque. And then we're going to make it a really subtle gray. So subtle that you'll be able to see white on it. And then we might make the starting point at about the header here. And maybe that's even too much. Something like that. So we're at 95 lightness. Now with this home indication, I do need to just remove that background here. And then also we're starting to lose our device a little bit. So I'm gonna change the background of this canvas to be a little bit darker. And there we go. And looking at this further, I am also vetting this on my device with Figma Mirror. And I like to see how it's gonna look on the actual devices I'm designing for. And I'm noticing the plus sign could be larger, but I'm keeping it locked into our assets and saying, okay, maybe that's a constraint. So what I'm gonna do is actually create add card here as a sort of label. And I think I'm gonna use label large, so 18 pixel here, and drop that into here, select both those elements, Shift A, make it 4 pixel horizontally from itself and move that over with the right arrow key. And I think that is more descriptive on what the plus action does, and I quite like that, so we're gonna roll with it. This is a good example of where visual design can differ from the wireframe. It shouldn't be taken so literally that it has to be a plus sign. The main UX states that we need the ability to add. We've just placed it up in the upper right, and I am going to continue that, but we're going to add the affordance add card label so everyone is really clear on what this add function does. All right, so now we have a nice gray background, even though it appears more white, which is just what we want because we still want it to be very light. So what I'm going to do is start typing out some content, which will be this card here, and we'll say balance. We'll type out the dollar amount. We'll copy these down. We will say available. We will update this dollar amount too. And now we have these. Let's auto layout them. Shift A when they're selected. We're going to keep that spacing, I think, the same, at least for now, 4 apart from each other. And then I'm going to rename this frame here to available and this frame to balance. And then we're going to auto layout both of these and name this, we'll just call it balance card. And then we'll space these maybe 12 or so. And then trying to think how I actually do want this to read with the emphasis. We said in the wireframes the number was most important, and that's kind of where we went with. Maybe we will de-emphasize these labels still and make them very small, I suppose. 14 is pretty small. It should be used cautiously, I would say. Maybe we go down to 16 and we just keep it like that. So we are going to stick with what we decided in the wireframes. I do think actually the balance that you hold ties to the amount of payments. So 12/47/30 is due in 2 days. Maybe we want to make the connection with that a little more clear. And so we make the headline of that the balance number. And then we use the same style for 2 days and payment due in. And so then we've made the connection there. And then actually what we're de-emphasizing is the available balance. So let's select this group, the balance card, and we will give it some padding, maybe just 8 and 8, and we'll see how that looks. We need to make it a pure white background. I actually don't know that I've made a pure white, which is sort of a blunder on my part, but normally the styles should include a white, and we will round these corners here. Maybe we'll go fairly round, and we want this to be spaced, we'll say 16 from the top, and we'll stretch this out. Actually, we did already do the math here on these, so 156 width should be good for both of these. I'm going to move that piece down, copy this over just so we can make it the same, and say 156. And then if we press Shift A and then make those 16 apart, and then we'll rename this card row 1 just to be super generic with it. And then we can drag in this content and delete the other content. This one will have to be renamed though. So if I press enter again, we actually don't need one of those. So balance is really payment due in, and then this one isn't payment card, it's due date card. And then we're going to fill container. As I'm looking at this, a couple things are coming in my mind. One, these feel crowded. We want them to feel airy, so let's give them a lot more air. And then also, we still can't really see them. Of course, on my MacBook display I can, but on my other monitor I can't really. And we want to accommodate for the lowest common denominator. So this pure white, so we have pure white at the top, but with the gray at the bottom, I think we can actually adjust to be even darker. So opening up this gradient, I'm actually gonna make it darker and use this time to put it in the match the cooler blue tones I was using. Maybe add 4 saturation. So we're at 95 lightness. I think we need to go even darker, and maybe like that. Maybe the white needs to start all the way at the top, and maybe actually it shouldn't be pure white. So if we go down to like 98, maybe that bottom swatch goes back up to 94, and then I think that's good. I just need to remove the background from my status bar, and there we go. I think that's looking much better. Cool, we're moving right along. We can quickly test this out if we do want it to be so large. Again, we would be using display here, so that's just jumbo. I think we'll stick with that. We're good to go, and I have no issues there. I do think maybe payment due in would take us to where we would actually pay this thing. So maybe we say pay now, just to give it that affordance that one can be interacted with. And let's just quickly make this a button here. Again, these should come from design system, but let's just work with what we have. Quickly do something like this. Maybe pay now is too large. It shouldn't be headline. Let's go body medium, which is 16. I think that could work. Drop that in there. Pay now. I think that is totally cool for what we're trying to accomplish here. All right, now let's copy one of these down, and we're going to make this our weekly activity. For 16 from the top, we'll just say weekly activity. We actually don't need this content. Okay, so for this chart, we're gonna wanna make this simple vector graphic, and we're gonna probably match the gradient of our primary card here. So there's a theme. I'm just wondering if we need any sort of interaction to it. Like if you tap, does an indicator occur saying how much money was spent at that point? I think that could be nice. Maybe let's try that out. So I'm going to kind of create the same thing, but I'm gonna round these edges here so it feels a little bit more intentional. And then let's make this a gradient, so linear, and this first one, let's pull from maybe up here. And then we're gonna want a middle swatch, and that one will pull from more of that magenta. And then finally, we're gonna carry through that same sort of purple color, and then let's order those in that same style. And there we go. Actually, let's put this in a frame, call it chart. And then if we drop chart in, we should be able to just cut and then select in weekly activity, paste. And then for this guy, we can't fill container because it's not in one, but we can drag it so it is the same length. And there we go. All right, so I've just quickly put together some pieces here that will indicate when we scrub on this chart, we want to see the exact dollar amount that perhaps took place at that day of the week. So maybe there are 7 snap points along this. Each day will tell you how much you spent. So what I have here is just an auto layout that is really small, 2x2 padding, and I've just put in my body small 14 text here, and we're gonna say 212, 30. Maybe we should vet out a worst case scenario where there's a third digit. So maybe we spent 21. Well, actually, if we're going by day, So we have 21230 for a day, and then I've created a little essentially ticker line here, which is just 75 in height. I've chosen my lighter gray 4. Once again, I've continued making these rounded, and it has 2 pixel width. And then I have a marker, a handle, a dot that will appear once you start scrubbing. Once you press into the card, and you'll get haptic feedback and vibrate. Here it looks like 2 circles, but what I've done is made it white with a black stroke that's up to 10, and it's a 16 by 16 dot or circle. So for this, I'm gonna say these need to be lined up together, and so I'll group these and call that indicator. And then I have this named amount. So with these, I'm going to cut them, so Command X, and come into the container I named here called chart, and paste those in there so it doesn't get all messed up with the auto layout. Actually, with this dollar amount, we're gonna attach this to the upper right. I'm gonna say, instead of, it could follow the ticker, which is one approach. It could also always persist, say 1616 or 88 in the upper right. So with this indicator, we can put this somewhere over here. I think it would be problematic with our designs if this hovered over it like this. We could also say it will snap to the bottom, which I think is a little strange. I just like seeing it on the top here, but I think if it just always remains in the upper right, we will have no issues as well. So there we go. This essentially will be a long press indicating this amount here. I'm actually seeing this headline weekly activity and think it lacks some weight too. So I am now going to go back and make this, let's see, my label small is a little heavier weight. Of course, 14 is very small. So label medium 16, I think, provides the weight that I'm definitely looking for. Now we need to just finish up with recent activity and then the navigation. I do need to expand this phone vertically, so I'm going to pin this to the bottom and then stretch this down here. And now we have recent activity, view all. So for view all, I think we can safely take this text style up here, duplicate it down, ungroup it, ditch the plus, and just call this view all. So we're nice and consistent there with the scale of type that we're using to indicate actions. And then also probably take this title here and say recent activity. For these, the same thing. I'm going to group, select them both, Shift A, and call this header. I'm going to make these also 16 from the top. I have a really strange decimal, which I cannot stand. I will remove that. And then let's see, 24, 16. We want this also to be space between. And then we're going to need to put this over here and then stretch that all the way to 24, 24. Now I remember looking back at our inspiration, it had much of the same of what our wireframes are indicating, which is a more bold title, a de-emphasized text underneath it, and then the bold amount of transaction on the right. So we're just gonna, I think, pull these in and attach our styles here. So we have these ones here are medium 16. I think we can make them body medium 16. Maybe we want them heavier, so label 16. And then these dollar amounts will probably just go with the same here, label 16. And then these guys, I think we'll want them to be a body weight, so a little bit lighter, body medium 16. And then they're super dark right now, or they're not really standing out from the background right now, so we'll make them pretty dark. And actually, I think we're gonna try emulating the card approach where we use a card on all this stuff too. So we'll select, first we need these to be 24 from the left and the right, and there we go. And then we'll move them up a little bit to there, maybe 24 from those guys, Shift A, and then actually keep the card spacing the same, 16, 16. And then we want these to be fill container and fill container. I actually think I want this to be a little bit larger and differentiate it from the other card styles. So recent activity is going to be a bigger title. We're going to pull that out and select both of these, press Shift A, and maybe make them 16 apart again. Something weird happened here, so we want this to be fill container. And again, something weird happened. So we'll recenter all that, reposition it, make sure our spacing system is still intact, and go 16 from the top. I think that pretty much covers it. Alrighty then, we did it. We just designed a screen from a wireframe, from a sketch, and we're pretty much there. This is the design process. So from here, I am going to do another video where we then prototype any important interactions, at least to the ability that Figma can do, that we want to communicate to people. And then from there, we will freeze it and break it off and decomp it and prepare it for handoff and send it to the developers. If you got something from this video, please remember to like and subscribe to support the channel. So stay tuned for next time. Until then, super nice guy out.